The arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro throws a lot about the future of that country into uncertainty. It also may complicate the lives of Venezuelans living here in Houston and across the United States, who are among the more than 7.9 million Venezuelans who have left their country since 2014. Houston is home to one of the largest Venezuelan communities in the United States, but many of them lost temporary protected status last year and wonder what comes next as they navigate an increasingly restrictive immigration landscape. Ruby Powers is an area immigration attorney. She tells Houston Matters producer Mincho Jacob there are conflicting signals from the Trump administration about area Venezuelans' potential pathways to legal status.
We've had multiple waves of Venezuelans coming to the United States. And so some of the first early waves, maybe about 20 or so years ago, some of them are US citizens and they're petitioning for their family members. But either between family based immigration or maybe they had another citizenship and they were able to do an investment, like maybe they were Spanish as well or Italian, or asylum. Many applied for asylum and they're just getting interviews, like I was mentioning, or temporary protected status, which was opened up in 2021 and 2023. And then there also was the parole that opened up as well temporarily to try to, under the Biden administration, to try to prevent illegal entries. And so individuals came that way. So there's been a lot of there's been multiple way avenues for Venezuelans to either find a temporary or more of a like a long-term status here. And I know that they've been a huge component to our economy and our community. I actually read Judge Lena Hidalgo's comment about her take on this transition, and she says Harris County has the fourth largest Venezuelan population in the U.S. And actually, I didn't even realize that until I read that, but I believe it. And we have been hit hard by the pausing and the ending of the TPS and also the bans, and that was all before this weekend. With the community has been hit hard by changes in U.S. immigration.
There was some confusion this week. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem suggested that Venezuelans could apply for refugee status even if they had had their TPS canceled. And then the department walked that back on social media. But what is the difference between the refugee status and asylum? And what are the options that Venezuelans currently living here in the U.S. without permission? What kind of options do they have?
So refugee is when you apply for humanitarian help through international humanitarian law and human rights law outside of the country. And usually when you think like refugee camps and things like that. So you're held outside till you're processed through a series of bureaucracy to be allowed and background checks and things like that to be allowed to be sort of sent to a country that's taking
Hmm.
refugees. And historically, under Trump administration, he has made that number very low, if almost nothing, the number of refugees that he allows during his administration. Asylum is when you're in the United States and you're applying and you're saying that you've either been persecuted in the past or you have fear of future persecution on of one of five protected grounds, and you have nowhere else to go in your home country, nowhere else to go in the world. I think the biggest question is what does this mean for Venezuelans who are in some type of a temporary or expiring status here in the United States? And because I'm thinking about that, I've got asylum interviews in about a week. We've got court cases coming up. I would think my answer to them would be this is very fluid. Just because the leader was taken out of the country. And I mean, this is very dynamic, minute to minute. We're getting headlines, updates of what's going on. We're not really sure how it's going to shake out. But for the Venezuelans who are listening, I would say I would probably stay the course of what you were planning to do here in the United States. Keep monitoring the news because we're not sure how it's all going to shake out. But I do know from doing asylum for so many years that just because one leader change doesn't mean the entire country changes. And it can take years for systematic change in a positive light to even come back to some type of normalcy. And so I do know that the Trump administration is trying to repatriate a lot of the Venezuelans back to Venezuela. But at the same point, it doesn't actually mean that their lives will be safe, depending on the reason why they left in the first place. So those are a lot of my concerns as an immigration attorney. Um, and I think it really depends on a case by case basis, but it is a very fluid situation. I don't think anybody knows how this is all going to play out.
You mentioned the travel ban or migration ban that was put in place by the Trump administration, including Venezuela, with many other countries limiting immigrants who can come here legally. And Venezuela is among those. Is there anything that folks that have elderly parents or siblings in Venezuela, if they're here in the United States, to bring them here? Or is there very limited options at this point?
I think it depends on the specifics of the ban at the time, because there could be something announced, right? And then there could be litigation about that. And so then I'm not saying like halt everything, but there are a lot of things paused right now. And we're hoping that we'll see some of that lifted. Um, but for the most part, I would say have a consultation with an experienced immigration attorney to evaluate your specific situation, especially if you're like a US citizen who is considering petitioning for your parents that are maybe in Venezuela and you're trying to bring them here or somewhere. And, I think it really sort of just depends on the circumstance. All of that does take time anyway. And some of the announcements that are happening from the Trump administration, they get pulled back. Like you were even mentioning what the secretary said, and then they've been sort of walking back that. Even we saw the whole H-1B debacle a few months ago when they announced something and then they've been walking that back for ever since. But anyway, I think you just have to be talking to somebody about your specific facts and monitoring that your specific situation. But in many of the bans, they do have exceptions for family of U.S. citizens, and so you just have to find out what's in place at that moment, and if that relationship overcomes that restriction.
If you're a person who is thinking of any of these channels, I mean, what is the best way to be prepared to be taking steps that, like, I don't know if you've heard of TPS as a possibility of getting reinstated. I mean, what can people do to be best prepared for any options that could come available in the future?
Things don't happen really quickly. Let's just remind people that. Like, people who applied for asylum in 2016 just got their interviews in 2025. True story. Multiple true stories there. So I think like it really depends on the individual. If it's asylum, if it's a family-based petition, if there's another country they can go to, if they have another citizenship that maybe allows them for an E2, like I was talking Spanish, for example, Italian. But then there also could be employment based. That's another thing that people have been exploring. But even if you wanted to do, let's say, the labor certification perm process, I mean, we're talking a couple of years to do that. And so if you're just thinking about it now, you might have to go to another country for a few years waiting if you don't need to not overstay your status. And so those some of these things would take a lot longer. I think there's others who are exploring national interest waivers. Again, that does have a backlog as well. And so you usually take 6 months to prepare, and then there's usually about a 2-year backlog for the visa, year and a half for the visa to be available. So I always have a backup plan, but even the backup plans might be taking a really long time. So it is unfortunate the predicament that Venezuelans in the United States and around the world are in, even in Venezuela at this moment as well. But I think as much foresight and planning that you can put into your case to have a backup plan and having a reputable experienced immigration attorney that's paying attention to everything and sort of give you the best perspectives, because a lot of times what I'll do is we'll have plan A, B, and C, and we'll just pivot as it progresses, because there's a lot of perspectives about what happened this weekend on, Venezuelans, Venezuelan Americans, Venezuelans in Venezuela. And I don't want to, belittle anyone's perspective and anyone's voice in any respect. But even just from my immigration attorney hat, I would just say that I know that even with a leader removed, things can still be continuing the way that people were afraid of. And as like my asylum hat, I guess you could say more specifically. And I think a lot of the Venezuelans here are still in the United States. Asylum is one of their last and probably only option that many of them have. And so, I mean, I think that's something to still explore. It doesn't mean that you can't pursue that. We're going to just have to keep monitoring what's happening with the administration. And I would just say, unfortunately, just pay attention to what's going on in the news. Have a reputable immigration attorney to lean on. Have a few sources of information, and it is very fluid, but we're hoping for the best for everyone. And we do care about Venezuela and Venezuelans, and they are part of the fabric of our community.
That's Ruby Powers, Houston area immigration attorney and founder of the Powers Law Group. She spoke with Houston Matters producer Mincho Jacob.